You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, Procurement Pro, Digital Nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, welcome to another episode of the ProcureTech podcast, where every week we bring you all that is fun, exciting and innovative in the digital procurement space. And this week we're going to be looking into a very, very relevant topic, because we're going to be talking all about supply chains, and specifically, where does the line of responsibility lie between procurement and supply chain? Which then sort of nicely leads to the other question, which is, should we be concentrating on better understanding our multi-tiered complex supply chains rather than just purchasing software to better track and trace shipments? It's a bit of a loaded question, and I'm sure we're going to have a great debate about this, because my guest today is an expert in the logistics and the supply chain field, who is Tobias Larsson from Altana.ai. Tobias, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be on the show, James.
Awesome. So before we kick off with the bulk of the interview, just give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself and how you got involved with Altana, and then maybe just tell us briefly what Altana does, because I think that sets the scene quite nicely for what we're going to sort of move on to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. Well, basically, I started my career in supply chain logistics. Well, actually, my career in logistics with DHL. So it's a long time ago now, but I started as a management trainee and had a great opportunity to actually work as a courier, work in terminals, night shifts, take calls in customer service. So I would say I really learned the nuts and bolts of the business, which was very, very helpful. And then went on to kind of work in different sales roles and freight and express type of sales. Eventually moved on to work with innovation, which was sort of almoys my big passion. I've been a part of a startup before, joining DHL, and DHL had a DHL Innovation Center where we had a strong focus on looking at sort of the pain points of customers and developing new solutions within DHL that could make DHL a more strategic partner to customers. And there I came into the topic of supply chain risk. It was 2011. We just had the earthquake in Japan, which disrupted supply chains globally in an unprecedented way. And many companies could just not, understand if they were disrupted. They didn't understand, where their suppliers were located in Japan and so on. So we really took that on and developed a supply chain risk solution, which we called Resilience 360, which later it went really well, and we had a good growth and a good number of customers joining us, new customers every year, and eventually decided to take that out of DHL and carve it out, and it became its own business, which is Everstream Analytics. So I had a very strong background in supply chain risk, and always been very passionate about that and helping companies to manage risk. And about a little bit more than a year ago, I joined Altana.ai. The ambition of Altana.ai is really to create a living map of supply chains, a single source of truth of global supply chains, and using different AI models to achieve that. And I think our CEO likes to call it the Google Maps of supply for business to business commerce, and I think that's a really appropriate way to call it. And it's really about sort of creating multi-tier visibility of supply chain networks, extended networks of supply chains, and using billions of data sets. We use a variety of different data, so shipment data, bill of lading data, business registry data, ownership data, really millions and billions of data sets that we stitch together with these AI models to be able to give a better picture of who's trading with whom, which suppliers trading with which suppliers, how are they connected, what products are they shipping, what goes between different suppliers, where are they situated in the world, where are their factories located, and ultimately be able to do value chain predictions, really to say, what does the value chain of a specific product looks like? What suppliers are involved, not just in the first tier, but in the second tier and the third tier. And this sort of global map of supply chains, we offer that up, and companies are able to kind of situate themselves in that and say, okay, what does my supply chain map look like? What does my value chain look like? Who are my tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 suppliers? What are the situation of those suppliers? So if you think about that from a procurement point of view, it's really helps to better understand the situation your suppliers are in. Are you a very important customer to that supplier? What other customers do they have? What does sort of the spread of their volumes look like? Who are they sourcing from? Or do they have potential bottlenecks maybe in the second tier? So your second tier. What does the sort of capacity situations look like? Are they getting the same type of volume of shipments as usually from their suppliers? And really give a more rounded view of your suppliers and the situations in their bill of materials and so on. So it's really a deeper way to look into the supply chains that over the years have become so complex. Very much focused on outsourcing. I think I will come back talk about some of the latest trends, but very sort of global and complex supply chains that are very hard to manage today. And we've seen that predominantly with the COVID-induced sort of supply chain issues that we had. That many of the issues that companies have today aren't with their direct suppliers. If you think about a semicon issue, it's really a tier 2 issue to the automotive industry. So.
Right.
Really much deeper down in the supply chain. So yeah, that's the focus of Altana, really to enhance the visibility and there's and to feed other applications in procurement and sustainability and compliance to enhance basically the visibility, which I think is one of the main issues, supply chain visibility in terms of managing risk in supply chains today.
Okay, so it's becoming more and more clear then that there has to be greater collaboration in the future between both corporate procurement at a more strategic level, but also local procurement at a more operational level with the wider supply chain function. So clearly we're talking here about manufacturing businesses, but with all of the experience that you've had in the past, are you starting to see a move away from procurement reporting into the CFO or maybe into a business unit, and instead now are you starting to see that shift to it reporting into supply chain or into the COO?
Yeah, I would say so, definitely. So I think we all can sort of, or many of us can subscribe to the sort of notion that procurement has sort of a bit of this policing character over it, right? So it's responsible for defining requirements, then making RFIs, RFQs, selecting the supplier that has the best value to against the cost and so on. And it's been a very sort of strict process, I guess, in many companies, and for good reasons. But I would really much say, in terms of what's happening in the market space today, looking at some of the trends. Some people like to call it the new supply chain normal. I think we'll see that this new supply chain normal with bottlenecks, these capacity shortages, these transportation issues that we've seen, and in the latest Ukraine-Russia issue, that it's really going to take some while until we get back to some like it was before, where you could have a very much sort of just-in-time supply chains, and I'd say, like in the past, I think procurement sort of took a bit of the role of pushing the liability, upstream in the supply chain. So expecting suppliers be always able to deliver, expecting suppliers to keep the necessary stock for that, measuring on-time performance and so on, and working along those lines. But I think, in the last sort of 2 years and much, due to COVID, that doesn't really work anymore, right? So if you just pointing fingers at suppliers and saying, okay, why are you not able to deliver? If they can't get access to the materials they need, or they're the supplies that they have, or for example, in a lockdown now with latest thing in Shenzhen, where 70 million people are quarantining, it just doesn't work to sort of expect them to deliver on short notice with short deadlines. But I think that it's just completely changing into a much more collaborative environment, where you need to create trusted networks with your suppliers, and together with them kind of manage risk and understand if you have issues, what you can do about them, and creating more this common sort of value chain visibility. So worst case, working to kind of re-engineer certain products, taking out features or finding new suppliers or, shifting parts, or in the best case, maybe just kind of rearranging your production network or changing your allocation. So I think procurement, you just kind of, being that policing function is not going to it's not going to work anymore. And especially now if you think about sort of finding more inventory. And I think you had a similar discussion in a previous podcast where you talked with Anne-Sophie Leblois about finding inventory and this necessary of speed in finding a new inventory. So in certain markets. So I think that's much more the notion today in procurement, that you need to be able to have this trusted network with your suppliers, to be able to act fast, to manage the risk that you see, to avoid the over dependency on certain suppliers in the network. So yeah, I would very much agree that procurement is going to be much more strategic and it sort of needs to be much more nimble, being able to work with different scenarios, and also being able to support maybe if there's a nearshoring activity going on in your company, or sort of a regionalization of supply chains, that it's just going to be changing much faster. And I guess I'm talking predominantly, as you said, a little bit for manufacturing supply chains and so direct spend, but that's sort of the world that I've been living in the last couple of years.
Hey, so just a quick interlude to let you know about procurementsoftware.site. This is a new website that I recently launched to give you, the listener, a free-to-access intuitive guide to digital procurement technology. You can filter on a multitude of different criteria and pick out a short list of procurement software solutions that are relevant to your business and your needs in less time than it takes to boil an egg. No corporate subscriptions, no complex jargon, and definitely no pay-to-play model. We are a completely transparent, open book, and we really want to get your feedback on what we can really do to make this user experience better and constantly improve, so as we're providing value to you. Check out procurementsoftware.site, and now let's get right back to this week's podcast. And in fairness, Tobias, I think that's where the majority of supply chain risk is going to come from. I mean, yes, you need to. I would include things like spare parts and operating supplies within that segment as well. But we're not really talking about toner for the printer or anything like that. It's really around anything that you need to run your production plant. So yeah, I think we're on the same page there. I'm glad that you mentioned nearshoring, because that's something that I would like to expand on a little bit more. So the most extreme example of managing risk is just to say, okay, let's nearshore or onshore our whole supply chain to the extent that you can. I mean, you can't source rare earth metals from most European countries, for example, or tropical fruit or cotton. But let's just say, for practical purposes, your goal is to nearshore or onshore as much of your supply base as you can. On the one hand, I guess you're still not going to eliminate all of your risk by doing that. But then if I flip it and sort of ask the other extreme of the question, could you, through a software platform like Altana or other competitive software that's out there, still maintain the complexity that you have in your supply chains today, with a very globalized supply chain, and minimize that risk to a bare minimum? Or is it kind of a mix between both approaches that most companies will probably follow going forward?
No, I think you'd see like a balance between nearshoring and still sourcing from far away. I mean, yes, of course. I think now the sort of the emphasis is on nearshoring and reducing the very long supply lines that many companies have had, and I think that's fair to look at that. I mean, it's also become a little bit of a national interest to be able to make sure that there's more nearshoring of very critical things like semiconductor, for example, bringing that closer to your market. But I think it's, I think, what we work with in Altana.ai is really the notion of trusted networks, really to, whether you nearshore or shore from far away, to be able to just virtually integrate your supplier in a better way into your network and be able to just create better models for trust and understanding where the issues are quicker. So it's been much more sort of a closed book sort of business before. So I think if you are able to better detail your value chain, it has a lot of merit in that, in terms of seeing things further ahead, being able to anticipate, even with price spikes we see in nickel, for example, now being able to manage that in a better way by understanding your exposures to that, and working with your supply base on it. So even if you have far away suppliers, just integrating them closer to your business and understanding the role that they have. I think, yeah, in many cases, it also means just having more inventory, right, than you had before. So I think, yeah, nearshoring is definitely the trend, but it's not the complete solution.
Do you think then around inventory that the shift away from just in time to just in case is going to become permanent?
I'll think you see a strong rebalancing. So I think inventory still costs money, and working capital is still an important aspect of running a business. So sort of just a complete shift is not not the answer either. So I think that's a rebalancing that's going on. I can't see into the future. I think the issues we have with supply chain disruptions are going to last for years, and I think there may be a situation where we go back to something that like it was before in a couple of years, but I think companies will be much more careful now. And it's not just in terms of just inventory or just in time. It's also in terms of, the geopolitics you see in the world today. Like the world's just not as it was before. And it's just necessary to be more mindful where you source from. And if you have long supply lines, to have more inventory. I think people have learned a lesson on that. So I don't see really that it's going to go back to, an extreme just in time.
And I guess as well, I mean, Brexit is probably the most obvious example of this, but there's going to be more of a shift towards more nationalistic policies, I guess, in terms of trade as well, which is going to impact that too.
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. I think supply chains have, as never before, become sort of national interest. I mean, from a US perspective, also from a European perspective. I saw Intel just established a new sort of semiconductor plant in Germany. So I think you'll see, I think sort of, policymakers have sort of realized just suddenly that supply chains are a very crucial part of maintaining security in the world. And of course, that doesn't mean that, every supplier has to be a national or local supplier, but sort of for many of the key critical, components, there's going to be, more legislation around sort of ensuring where, that both ethical and sustainable. Actually, if you think about it from that aspect as well. So there's been a huge move towards considering ethical and sustainable aspects in supply chains. So, I mean, the UK had the Modern Slavery Act for some time. France also has a Supply Due Diligence Act that's been established. But then in the US, for example, now at the end of last year, there's the new Forced Labor Act that came out, that sort of demands companies to be able to ensure that they have no products coming from Xinjiang in China, where there's strong evidence of forced labor activity.
That's in the cotton in the cotton production, right? Predominantly.
Yes, cotton is tomatoes. It's polysilicon, so it's really sort of three main commodities. But the act really says that you have to prove that your supplies or your products coming from there are not part of forced labor activity. So the proof is on the company, right? And so you're guilty until proven otherwise.
We have this new supply chain law as well now that's just come into force in Germany too, which now puts the responsibility, as far as my understanding of it is, on the end manufacturer to be responsible for their second and third tier suppliers too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, this is going to come in Germany is going to come into effect 1st of January 2023. So companies are really now kind of gearing up to that and saying looking at what they need to do. I mean, it's clear that just having sort of some supplier code of conduct that you pass on to your suppliers is not going to work anymore. So you need to have an active risk management process, not just a policy, but a process that where you do actually look at your supply base, your suppliers, and even if there is sort of if there's accusations of some activity or some journalist claims that you're part of an illicit supply chain in the third or fourth tier, you have to prove that you're not. So you have to really be able to create that kind of value chain visibility, then sort of on the fly and make sure that, well, if you're part of it, to provide evidence of remedy quickly. So I think there's a total new way of looking at supply chains, and of course, this impacts procurement as well, greatly to be able to understand. I think in many cases, these type of new requirements, these new legislations coming out, will fall into the responsibilities of procurement. I see that, there are many procurement departments that don't have that role to also look at that and just, but that nature sort of it's a very different game than before, right? Than just running RFQs. You have to just be much more mindful of which suppliers you select and what supply chains you're part of.
Yeah, 100%. And I think going back to the comment that you made a little bit earlier around procurement historically perhaps being seen as the policeman, we still are going to be in that respect, but it's going to be much more joined up thinking in terms of, the business has to make these changes from a regulatory and compliance perspective. And it will just be, I guess, procurement that is ultimately the function that interacts with the supplier and ensures that compliance. Whereas in the past, this type of thing may have come under environmental health and safety in terms of internal policies to make sure that employees are treated fairly and that there's a safe workplace. This type of regulatory compliance is now going to be, I guess, probably, we don't know, but most likely the responsibility of procurement to ensure that suppliers comply to the legislation and that the companies have the documentation, further to the point you made, that to prove that if there is an investigation, to prove that they're innocent and that they're compliant. Which kind of then leads me nicely on to what I was going to move on to next, which is, should we still be focusing on software that tracks cargo so as you can, monitor where things are in your supply chain? Will there still be a need for that? Or if we concentrate on better understanding our multi-tiered supply chains, do you think the need for that would to a large extent go away? Because I guess the reason why I'm asking that is tracking cargo is very reactive, isn't it? Yes, it flags when you've got a problem and if something's going to dock in the port later than you expected, but it doesn't solve the problem, does it? That if you haven't got parts, you can't produce anything.
Yeah. Yeah, surprise, surprise. I would definitely argue for that. I mean, that there's been an overemphasis on tracking cargo and looking at ETAs, and there's been a lot of innovation in that space and huge investments going towards businesses, startups, covering that sort of aspect. So looking at ETAs, when will something arrive? I think companies can, in many areas of their business now can predict on the hour when something will arrive and get delays. And I'm not saying that that's not important. That's very important, especially in the environment we're in with the huge variability on shipment times currently with the port congestions, maybe easing a bit now. But I think that is definitely something that companies should focus on. But if you look on where you put your investment and how you divide your investment on different activities, I think there's been an underinvestment on understanding your value chain. Like if you look at some of the statistics, McKinsey has a really nice study about this, and with a large number of companies involved, and it's sort of appalling. I think it's 20% know something about their tier 2 of companies asked, and it's like 3% know something about their tier 3, and then adding to that, sort of most disruptions, I would argue, more than 50%, they don't occur from your, between your direct supplier and yourself, your production sites, but actually in the lower tiers and the sub tiers of the supply chain. So I definitely think that, companies would gain much more value of that type of visibility in this new environment we're in as well. Like if you think about the commodity price spikes, understanding, to what degree you will be impacted to that, what you need to do in terms of your pricing strategy, and your bill of materials. I think that's definitely what I would argue. And actually, there's also another study, I think, by Accenture, showing that if you look at your supplier base and if you look at your tier 1 suppliers, you would probably expect to have 7 to 17 times more suppliers in your total supply base across all tiers that are critical and relevant. So you're really just looking at the tip of the iceberg if you look at your tier 1 suppliers. So I would argue, yes. I mean, of course, being able to manage delays in your shipments and avoid loss of sales, it's important, will continue to be important. But I think more investments should go to the value chain visibility that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I would almost counter that to some extent. I mean, I agree with what you're saying about knowing your tier 2s and tier 3s, but I'm not convinced that a lot of companies fully understand their tier 1s either. And by that, I mean, yes, they've got a pretty good grasp of their top suppliers by spend. But when you go down to the long tail, it's the typical Pareto analysis that 80% of your vendor count only accounts for 20% of your spend. And if you've got some tail spend, usually tail spend is mostly on indirect commodities, but if you've got tail spend on direct suppliers as well, I would hazard a guess that for the most part, companies don't really have a strong grasp on that, especially if they are the type of suppliers that are not actively being managed by procurement, save for maybe a price negotiation when the supplier knocks on the door asking for an increase because commodity prices have gone up.
No, but correct me if I'm wrong, but when you look at these supplier onboarding platforms, I'm not going to mention any names now, but they never ask you about the supplier where you actually manufacture or produce something. I mean, that type of information you should not capture in that process. So you're totally right. I think most companies don't even have the right type of visibility on their tier one suppliers. In many, I would say like up to 50% don't know exactly where their tier ones produce something. I mean, of course, they have the name, their ERP system and so on, and they know how much maybe they spend on the supplier, but they don't know enough about the supply chain in terms of where they actually produce something, the material, which is then going into your factories. And that is critical information to manage supply chain, manage, capacities and so on. Understanding like your dependencies in lower tiers. So I think you're spot on. I think even with the tier ones, there's a great lack of visibility, and I think there needs to be some, that definitely just needs to be a change around that, right? So.
No, for sure. And I think even if they do know, it's often just in someone's head or in an Excel sheet rather than in a single source of truth or a repository that's accessible to all, which then sort of kind of leads me on nicely to talking a little bit more about the tech piece. So using technology to help with third-party risk management and predictive procurement, which is a bit of a buzzword these days. What can you focus on there? Where can you really make a difference? Because I mean, let's be honest. Unless you're a geopolitical expert, you probably wouldn't have been able to predict a war between Ukraine and Russia with some smart software. But there is a lot that you can do on things like regulatory and climate and geopolitical, natural disasters and cybersecurity, right? So maybe just walk us through some of those aspects that Altana can give increased insight on.
So I find it interesting, again, to sort of a study. I really like statistics and different studies, but read a lot. But Gartner brought out a pretty recent study about what challenges companies have in terms of managing supply chain risk. And what came on very strongly on top was supply chain visibility again. So I think, as you said, I agree. Geopolitics are very hard to predict. And the Ukraine-Russia crisis, I think very few in the supply chain procurement space, at least, were able to foresee that happening. It's actually my sort of main mantra when it comes to supply chain risk is that predictive, risk or predictive procurement, I think, predictive risk is what I've been focused on is you can try to be proactive about things. You should definitely try to see if you have sort of dependencies in lower tiers that, you're single source on something, for example. But I think the key is always going to be on your reactive capabilities to be able to react fast when something happens, because it's impossible to predict. The bigger events that happen that really impact sort of the black swans, if you like. So I think having supply chain visibility is what I would argue is the key thing. Even in the situation with Ukraine, Russia, which of course, most of us humanitarian crisis and looking at supply chains is really a secondary thing. But of course, we still need to keep our supply chains kind of running. And I think many companies would look at, their ERP systems and say, okay, well, we have very limited Russia-Ukraine exposure. But again, like if you think about the second and the third tier, we usually see a 10x more suppliers in the second tier, and then that continues in the third tier. So if you think about some of the commodities coming out of Russia, like, nickel, alumina, titanium, palladium, neon gas from Ukraine, steel in the wider sense, are very critical components in so many different products. So I really argue that sort of, being able to understand now your dependency on a situation like that is the critical thing. And then there are many different things you can do about it when you have the visibility and when you can react on something. Worst case, you would have to kind of try to find alternative suppliers, or alternative materials, or change the product. But in other cases, there are things you can do in terms of your own supply base and your own production network to mitigate the risk. So, but you need to know about it quickly. And of course, there are third-party data sets that can help with certain things like cyber risk assessments or NatCat. I mean, NatCat, natural disasters, there are lots of models for that in terms of third-party models you can use for understanding your flood risk or your quake risk. But they've also been quite wrong, actually, the last 10, 20 years. Probably due to climate change, right? So I don't know if it helps you or what was the answer you were looking for, but I would argue that sort of it starts with sort of the visibility, and then some of the third-party data sets can be helpful, but the key is the visibility.
So what do you think then is preventing companies from investing in this kind of technology? Because it sounds on balance like a no-brainer, doesn't it? Because I think most sensible people would admit that this sort of VUCA world is here to stay for the foreseeable future. So why aren't companies banging down your door to invest in this type of thing? Is it just they don't have the capabilities, or they don't understand the tech that's on the market, or do they genuinely not see the need or the urgency?
Great question. I mean, I've been in this space for so long, since 2011, so I can tell you it was even much harder before COVID. But there was a steady uptake. Right. I mean, as I said, like with the Resilience 360, we had more and more customers every year, and we grew nicely. But often then, before COVID, it was all about cost, right? I think in supply chain and procurement, the same, just finding the cheapest supplier, reducing, doing network analysis to reduce your spend somehow, optimize your cost was the focus. Of risk was, came a bit secondary. Now I think it's a totally different situation. So I think most companies, softwares in this space, are probably seeing stellar growth and a lot of uptake. No surprise. So I think some of the challenges that they have now, though, is that it's probably a little bit of lack of talent. So this is a very new topic to many. So if you think about working in procurement and then suddenly you have to work with these third-party type of risk data in terms of natural disaster type of risk assessments, like we talked about, like that's totally new data sets that maybe you're not so familiar with. It's not where you were kind of, trained to do. So I think it will take some while to understand what this is all about. And then it's a lot about the data. I mean, getting the right type of data in place. So many companies have been growing by acquisitions. So they have so many versions of SAP available, and they don't speak with each other. So they just getting, like, as we said before, just getting the visibility on their own suppliers is difficult. Just getting data and organized so you can do something with it is difficult, because you need your data in some ways organized to use some of these softwares and supply chain risk.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So that's really what we do a lot at Altana, to kind of help companies to get data, your supply chain master data organized, so that you can then kind of situate yourself in the global map of supply chains that you created, so you can start to create some better visibility. But it takes time. And also many of these sort of things that companies have tried them before, but surveys, like asking your suppliers about things, to fill out a survey on a regular basis, they just have been very difficult and often fail. So data isn't easy. It's not easy, and that's what's really required to do sophisticated things in this regard.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with you on data, 100%. I think that's often an obstacle that procurement leaders maybe incorrectly put in the way to invest in tech, because there are systems out there now that can help to harmonize and clean it. It's not perfect. You will still need some human interaction to validate it, but it's a million miles away from where we were just even 5 years ago. So no, I would completely agree with you there. Final question, Tobias, if anyone would like to get in contact with you or learn more about Altana, what's the best way that they can get in touch?
Well, we got a website, Altana.ai. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, so you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. So and we can take it from there.
Awesome. Tobias, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge here. You're obviously a wealth of knowledge in this area, so it's been really great talking to someone that knows so much in this space that I've not really had much focus on during my career. So thank you for coming on the show, and all the best.
Well, thank you so much. It was a great time.
So that is third-party risk management, ladies and gentlemen, and some of the challenges and possibly some of the solutions that may be there out there that can help us all get to grips with what is a new but very rapidly becoming critical area of procurement and supply chain skill set that we're all going to have to learn. Just a quick couple of things before we sign off. If you want to get an overview of procurement software in one place in just a few mouse clicks that matches your needs, then head over to procurementsoftware.site. Also check out our LinkedIn page and sign up for our newsletter, which is in the show notes at the bottom if you'd like to get updates from us once a month on all things happening in the ProcureTech space. Until then, we will catch you again next week. Thank you very much for listening. And until then, bye for now.